Okay, it's 12:01, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Deanna Goodwin. I'm the educational specialist here at Spark, and you are joining us for a deep dive on ADUs. Our session agenda for this afternoon, I'm going to walk you through a brief overview about Spark. From 12:10 to 1, we have Todd with AARP presenting. From 1 to 1:50, we have Tim with the City of Omaha presenting, and then we will take that last 10 minutes to answer any questions. Spark is a nonprofit. We specialize in holistic community development. Our mission at Spark is to profoundly transform disinvested neighborhoods into prosperous and thriving communities. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through our educational programming. We have our monthly deep dives and quarterly build sessions. These are on a singular real estate development topic, and we bring in local industry experts to present. We also have our Developer Academy. It's a week-long intensive training and networking opportunity for emerging developers. Developer Academy, this is an application-based program. So if it's something that you're interested in, I'll drop more information in the chat so you can check it out. We do have some exciting upcoming events. On April 9th, we have a deep dive on smoke-free housing and lead safety. We have someone from UNMC presenting, as well as the City of Omaha. And please save the date for our development symposium. That will be June 4th and 5th, and that's in partnership with the Omaha Land Bank and Front Porch. We have a lot of exciting sessions. You don't want to miss it. So please make sure you follow us on our social media pages to get an update on ticket sales. We are hoping to launch those next week. Some house rules. This is a recorded session. A survey will be sent out within the week for your feedback. Those surveys are so important to us. They let our funders know that this type of education works. So please, please, please make sure you fill that out for us. You will get an email sent to you with a link to the recording and all materials from our speakers today. If you could please mute yourselves during our presentations. If you have any questions, you can use that hand raise tool, or you can drop your questions in the chat. During the Q&A, we will address the chat questions first. So we will save all the questions until the end, but if you make sure that you drop them in the chat, we'll make sure to get those answered. Our session objectives for this afternoon: understanding the connection between demographic trends, housing, and the desire to age in place. Understanding the role ADUs can play as an age-friendly housing option. Understanding the ongoing work to promote, support, and build ADUs in Omaha. We're going to go over what is and isn't an ADU and why they are important. General understanding of ADU regulations and where you can reference specific regulations. And then we want you to have knowledge of the approval process and potential issues with permitting an ADU. And with that, I would like to introduce our session speakers. Today, we have Todd Stubendek, who is the Nebraska State Director at AARP. And we have Tim Fries, who is a city planner with the City of Omaha. So with that, Todd, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's see if I can execute this better than I did when we practiced it.
Yep, and you take your time.
Okay, let me know if you see that.
Perfect. Yep, we can see your screen.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Todd Stubendek. I'm the AARP Nebraska State Director. And what I suspect at least some of you are sitting on the other side of this screen saying, why in the heck is some guy from AARP here to talk to us about ADUs and housing issues? Isn't AARP all about Social Security and Medicare and those things that my parents and grandparents care about? Well, I'm here to tell you that Social Security and Medicare are very important things and things that we advocate for on almost a daily basis. But I hope by the end of this session, the presentation I'm giving today, you know why housing and ADUs is a critical issue, not only for AARP, but for older Nebraskans. I will say this presentation is geared towards educating our members and the public about ADUs, many of whom don't probably have your level of expertise. So I'll try to adjust parts of the presentation as we go along to better reflect that. There we go. When we do present this to the public, we ask them, what do you think it means to expand your housing options? It means thinking about your home in a new way and looking at its possibilities for housing beyond just one family. So I'll ask you today to take a moment to visualize your own home and think about the possibilities. As you age, is there space for you to easily downsize to a separate, more accessible space on your property? Do you have older relatives who might need more family support as they age? And do you have space to house them in your home? If you don't have a clear picture of that in your mind, don't worry. This session will really help to paint that picture of what flexible housing could look like. You might already be familiar with all this. Seems like so many terms for ADUs: in-law suites, guest houses, carriage houses, guest cottage, or in-home apartments. Like I said, these are all sort of the colloquial names that we use for accessory dwelling units. And I think we're hearing more and more about accessory dwelling units, sort of not only in Omaha, around the country. For many people, this began during the coronavirus pandemic, when people were looking for creative and flexible housing options to allow loved ones to live closer without necessarily sharing those same four walls. ADUs have many benefits for homeowners and their communities. We'll look at different types of ADUs. We'll also talk about the work we have done and are doing here in Omaha, and we'll hear more from our second speaker to talk more about that as well. And then I'll provide some resources that AARP has regarding ADUs. On the next two slides, I'm going to present two competing truths. And on the third slide, I'm going to pose a question for all of you. The simple fact is America is aging. We're getting older. In 2023, more than 59 million adults age 65 and older lived in the United States, accounting for nearly 18% of the nation's population. It's estimated by 2040, there will be more than 78 million older adults age 65 plus, comprising 22% of the population. By 2034, the United States will, for the very first time in our history, be a country comprised of more older adults than of children. That progression is even more pronounced here in Nebraska. The proportion of Nebraska's population that is over 60 is growing, while the proportion that is under 60 is actually shrinking in Nebraska. I'm going to say, as a representative of AARP, I feel the need to dispel the notion that aging is a bad thing. I guarantee you it's worse than the alternatives. In truth, the good news is that it's a reflection that we're living longer, healthier lives, more fulfilling lives than at any point in our history. I think the other notion out there is that an older population is some sort of drain on society. Again, the truth is people over 50 are a major economic driver here in Nebraska, and their economic power will only grow in the coming decades. According to our AARP Longevity Economy Outlook report, Nebraskans 50 plus creates an outsized economic impact, and again, will continue to drive for the next 30 years. In 2018, the 50 plus population accounted for 34% of Nebraska's population, yet contributed 39% or $50 billion to the state's total GDP. Their activities, in addition, supported 566,000 jobs and generated $33 billion in wages and salaries. That said, we also need to recognize that an aging population has some special needs and considerations. I referenced it earlier. When I started AARP, I thought, Medicare, Social Security, those will be the two big issues that I work on. Again, those are important, but our work is much more expansive on AARP than just those sort of narrowly focused issues. AARP is really about empowering people to choose how they live as they age. And to do that, we know one of the things that they need is access to affordable, age-friendly homes that meet their changing needs as they age. On the screen here, you see a variety of stats and responses to surveys talking about the desire of people to age in place. And you're going to hear me say age in place throughout this presentation. That's the desire to stay in their homes or the lowest level of care for as long as possible. I can tell you this number is even more pronounced here in Nebraska. According to our 2022 Vital Voices survey of Nebraskans 45 and older, 84% of the respondents said staying in their home as they got older was extremely or very important to you. We believe that ADUs can play a major role in serving the needs at once by allowing for a greater number of smaller homes and more compact neighborhoods. Family-friendly, multi-generational housing is important and sometimes can be overlooked, but ADUs can provide that opportunity to help folks age in place from a number of different ways that we'll talk about as we move through. Given the information from those last two slides, the question I have is, are we ready? Are we ready for this coming demographic wave of an aging country, state, and city with that desire to be able to age in place and stay in our homes and stay out of congregate living situations like nursing homes? What are the possibilities for designers and builders to recognize the needs of this growing market and include age-friendly universal design design elements starting now? Again, you've heard me use this phrase age-friendly a number of times. That's when a home meets our needs as we age. However, more and more, I'm trying to work into my lexicon an age-ready house. An age-ready house is defined as a home that has a zero-step entry, a bedroom and a full bathroom on the main floor, and a bathroom with at least one accessibility feature. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, only 10% of American homes meet this definition of age-ready. So, you see there's a major disconnect between the two slides I just showed you of that demographic wave and of our ability to house people appropriately for the older part of their lives. So again, if I had to answer this question, is Omaha ready? Today, I would say no, we are not ready, but I'm hoping all of you will help us get there in the coming years. To help address this empowering people to choose how they live, AARP is working on something that we call livable communities. A livable community is, essentially we know that for people to age in place and stay in their homes, people need safe walkable streets, they need age-friendly housing, they need good transportation access to services and opportunities for residents of all ages to interact with each other and community life. And so this is the core of our work that we call livable communities. And we do this work sort of in urban, suburban, rural areas of the state. It really is trying to make our city better places for people of all ages. And we do this by engaging with elected officials, city planners, architects, builders, and communities at large to think about how we can make our cities and our communities more age-friendly in the future. This slide actually shows the 8 domains of AARP's livability. Today, we're just going to focus on the one, which is housing. Oops. As the slide says, we spend more time in our homes than anywhere else. So housing costs, choices, and accessibility are critical components. And this really gets to that first question I asked about why would AARP care about ADUs and housing in general? It's because that we recognize to meet that desire to age in place and stay in our homes as we age, we have to create diverse housing options that meet the needs of people as they age, meets those changing needs of aging. I also want to point out, we talk about sort of aging in place. That doesn't necessarily mean staying in your current house forever. For some, aging in place may involve downsizing out of that large single family home. In fact, 57% of people 50 plus say they would consider leaving their current home to find one that would better suit them when they age, as they age. The problem that we found is there just aren't many places in, America. We also see it really sort of here in Omaha and the state at large. We aren't a lot of those age-friendly housing that fall somewhere between that large single family home and assisted living. And that's the space in which AARP is working to try to create more examples of that. One of the examples I give of this, and gosh, she hates it, so if we could all not tell her I've done it again, is using my mom as an example. My mom lives in Holdridge, Nebraska. She is widowed, and she is still in the large 4-bedroom house where she raised our family. It's more house than she needs. It's more house than she can keep up with. And I'm scared to death we're going to find her at the bottom of the stairs. That said, she is nowhere near being ready for an assisted living facility. But in Holdridge, there's really not that option between that large single family home and moving to an assisted living facility out there. So she stays in that house. And so we try to make this case that more age-friendly housing actually helps us address our workforce housing that we hear so much around the state. If we were providing that next housing step for people and allowing them to downsize and move into more age-appropriate housing, that then opens up that large single-family home for a younger family to buy and to grow their family in as well. Moving into sort of more specific talking about what an ADU is. An accessory dwelling unit is a small residence that shares a single-family lot with a larger primary dwelling. It's an independent living space. It's self-contained with its own kitchen, kitchenette, bathroom, and living spaces and sleeping areas. The illustration up here shows several different configurations of that with an ADU that's attached. The two on the right have a detached. We also know that ADUs can be within the home, as long as they have that separate entrance and a kitchen and a bathroom as well. You may have also heard tiny houses, a lot of talk of tiny houses. I think they're kind of trendy right now. ADUs are not necessarily tiny houses, but they're similar. ADUs are compact, but not teeny. So they're more practical options for individuals, couples, and families seeking small, affordable housing. I also think that tiny houses tend not to be accessible. I think oftentimes they have stairs and ladders to reach loft spaces where sleeping occurs. So different than what we're talking about when we talk about ADUs, especially ADUs that are appropriate for people to age in place. As I mentioned, they have a lot of names, ADUs, in-law suites, guest houses, carriage houses, guest cottages, or in-home apartments, and the list goes on. I don't know if anyone's here is old enough to have watched Happy Days back in the day. They're also called Fonzie flats because Fonzie, the character, actually lived in an ADU. He lived in an apartment above the Cunningham's garage. ADUs were fairly common until the 20th centuries. At that time, there were few or no zoning rules. There were also few municipal services or infrastructure like utilities, roads, schools, trash collections, or first responders. Modern zoning really began to take all of that in consideration. But I will say ADUs began to make a comeback in the 1980s as cities explored ways to make smaller, more affordable housing options within single dwelling neighborhoods. Again, in this photo, we see sort of a variety of different of the types of ADUs: an above garage, an ADU attached to an existing house, and two types of converted garages. When we present this to the public, we always ask the public, do any of these ADUs fit into the character of your neighborhood? Can you see these, involved with your neighborhood, your house, or meeting your needs? We have a couple of videos that I hope we will get the sound and be able to play throughout this. This one is a rather short one, sort of about a unique approach to ADUs.
ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, which is a second dwelling, meaning a second home on the same parcel as another home, but it's much smaller.
So it's not just smaller space, it's smaller bills, it's smaller utilities, it's less rent if you have to pay rent. It's certainly less cost to build when you have a smaller square footage. So that's really critical when you're looking at affordability and the housing crisis that many cities are facing these days.
We're building an accessory dwelling unit in our backyard right now out of 2 shipping containers. So we're really excited to just sort of have this opportunity to have a small dwelling in our backyard that will allow us to age in place eventually. We can, as we grow out of our house, move in there. But our plan initially is to actually move in and rent out our main dwelling to sort of offset costs and to have some supplemental income as well. Our accessory dwelling unit is going to have 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen and full bathroom, and a common space that will incorporate a living room and dining area as well.
So I think one of the common things you're going to see as I show you several videos of people who are building ADUs and approaching this is we're going to hear a lot about sort of ADUs serving a diverse purpose and addressing a diverse set of needs as people move forward.
ADU is an accessory.
Oops, there you go. So again, when we do this in a public, we do this question, a little quiz about which of these is not an ADU. Of course, it would be C because it does not have a kitchen or a bathroom. Those are important parts of having an ADU. Here is another video. Again, it talks about options for older adults and multi-generational families.
You know, I've been here for almost 19 years now. It's the longest place I've ever lived as an adult now. So it's home. And that's the great thing about this neighborhood. You know, I can walk 2 blocks down to International Boulevard, and a 12-minute walk I can get to BART, which is our heavy rail system here. So it's nice that I can access a lot of things without actually being in a car, which is what I really wanted in a neighborhood. One of the things I think will really benefit of having an ADU, from our perspective, it allows us to be able to have, our elder of our family, Iris, be able to stay with us and, reduce her costs. But even if she doesn't stay there, it allows us to then provide opportunity for, you know, a younger person that wants to move into the community. That helps us to be able to have an additional income, allows us to stay here longer.
My mother's very social, she's very active, older but not old, young at heart for sure. So having a space where she can still live her life is important.
The more close-knit you have your family, it's usually the better off you are. You know, you have those conversations that can't occur over the phone, that occur when you have it right here close together. But it's also just a sense of comfort knowing that they're close and that if they need something, you know, if we need something from Iris, or Iris needs something from us, we're right here for each other.
The option of having her close to us without necessarily being in our space is a wonderful solution for everybody.
But it also could be a play that, you know, that allows us, as we age, and I do have some health issues that vary up and down, so my work schedule can change, how much time I can work, that provides us, you know, additional income. So I have that flexibility of physical, but really of mental, being able to know that we're going to bring income in and be able to stay where we really like to be.
Yeah, so what I loved about that video is I heard at least 3 and maybe 4 different reasons that they were thinking as a family why an ADU could be important to them, both in taking care of some current folks, their future, and maybe even a place for them to have a young person stay in the future.
You know, I've been here.
So we always, one of the things that we've asked in our polling that AARP does is sort of those who are interested in ADUs, what are the main reasons? And these are the top answers that we get as far as why someone is interested in building an ADU. And I'll say, I'm a little bit surprised that the top 2 answers are the top 2 answers, that providing a home for a loved one in need of care and providing housing for older relatives and friends both come in at 84 and 83% respectively. The lowest, which is still a significant, is 53% of people talk about earning extra income from renting to a tenant. So again, people who are looking at these have a variety of ways they intend to use them. I think, again, what's great about ADUs is they do provide that diversity for folks to look at. So this is another video that shows someone who has decided to convert their garage to a more usable space for their family.
Here in Ashland, Oregon, there are a lot of these ADUs that happen. The rental scene has kind of, like it has for the rest of the country, been pushed to a difficulty because, you know, people need space. We've got a university here, we've got a big theater here, we've got more people that want to move here, and I think it's part of the living culture is what separate space do you have, how do you use it. It offers people a way to add to what they already have. You know, and I think that just gives you more opportunity, more reason to stay here because you've got some possibilities. And I think also as you get older, things change. You know, so we just moved out of the garage like moments ago, actually. They just last week started to do some of the demolition work. And everybody's got a different story. You know, our hope is that maybe at least for the first year, we can just have friends and family in and out of there, and then maybe rent it out. You know, but our one and only kid is away at college and she's a freshman.
You'll be able to see it all. Yeah, do you want to see it? Okay, and this is Tom. He's taking stuff away too. All right, girl. Here we go.
You know, have no idea what's going to happen in the world, and have no idea, you know, if my kid is going to need a space to come back to. And we have a small house and we have 1 bathroom and we've been able to live with that. But to give her a second space possibly to land, you know, in between things, or, you know, just if she needs help. I think it also keeps us in the world a little bit because, you know, I've thought, well, maybe there's a foreign exchange student, you know, that might want to live there, or maybe there's, you know, I just feel like the possibilities have grown about what that space could be for us and for other people.
So I always chuckle at that one because the beginning, when she's thinking through the ways that they might use that ADU that they're working on, is first friends and family. and then rental, and then she starts talking about the daughter. And I think in the back of her mind, she's more and more convinced that the daughter actually will be coming back and using that space. But again, it shows that flexibility and diversity. Again, this slide gets at this idea of ADUs at all ages and all life stages. One of the ways that they could be used, if you're interested in age-friendly housing or aging in place, you could construct an ADU with universal design features, for a future relative. It could be a family member. It could also be a live-in aide who would take care of you while you lived in the main house. One of the pushbacks that I think that we get, and rightfully so, ADUs are not cheap to build, and I don't think anyone should sort of pretend they are. But when you begin to look at the monthly cost of assisted living and nursing home care, it starts to become a more perhaps doable alternative to that. In Nebraska, monthly cost for assisted living averaged just over $4,000 a month. For nursing home level care, that's $8,000 a month. When a family is sort of facing that cost to take care of a loved one or themselves, suddenly an ADU becomes more of a cost possibility for people to take care of. And again, for a family that's younger, that has kids, the ADU could be a place where the nanny or the au pair stays. For people who are working, it could be used as the home office. And again, it could always be a place where people rent it out to get some extra family income as well. I think this is our last of our videos.
Several features that are very unique to this space for us. One, very practically, it's the first time I've had all my tools for my artistic work in one spot, which makes
my
it,
garage.
yes, right. But also on another level, well, we both had been badgering our wonderful contractors to make sure that the doors were the right width. We have several friends who are in wheelchairs. We've never been able to invite them to our home because we have a lot of steps. And so one of the things that I wanted to make absolutely certain that this space accommodated accessibility, both for our friends and also potentially for us if one or the other of us needs a more accessible space. So we had a Thanksgiving dinner here just recently, and that was when we had our first guest in a wheelchair.
We just settled right down to dinner with the rest of us.
Yeah.
It was great.
So for us, if we live here as we age, it makes it very convenient.
It's also just a quieter space that we wanted to actually relieve ourselves of all of that digital world a little bit. It's walkable from here down the alleyway 2 blocks away to get to the center of town, to the community-owned grocery store, coffee shops.
Shops and restaurants.
I could take the bike path down to the YMCA and swim or work out or whatever and back. The whole area is conducive to being able to interact with others, but also just to get to stuff in town. And I think as we age and decide we don't want to deal with the steps in our house and things like that, this will be a great place to phase into how we want to live our lives at that point.
So I'll say in this video, I absolutely love their commitment to considering not only the accessibility needs of their current friends, but also their own future potential accessibility needs, and building that space so that it can accommodate what they may or may not need in the future. It's one of those things where at 35, my house may have universal design features that I don't notice. But at 75, it might be those design features that are allowing me to stay in my home and keep me out of an assisted living care. So again, for us, our focus on our ADUs is making sure that we're considering that universal design accessibility part of it as well. So here are a couple sort of to get, and I'm going to defer a little bit to Tim on some of this and let him talk more about this. This comes from a resource that I'll talk more about later that AARP has. These are just showing 2 different designs. It always confuses me a little bit when I look at it. On the left is a 350 square foot. And so if you look on the far left of the left photo, you sort of see the main house with 2 cars in front of it and then the ADU behind it. On the right then is a much larger ADU that's behind the backyard, but you see the much larger one works as well. And sort of the discussion around this is, do you think you could live in a 350 square foot ADU? Would it meet your needs? It always kind of makes me chuckle because I suspect there's quite a few people that are living in New York City that would probably kill for a 350 square foot apartment. So it's about what we're used to going through. The other thing is, I don't know, the 900 square foot may not be legal in many places. It may actually be too large in comparison with the main dwelling space as well. I want to transfer a little bit more into what we are, as AARP Nebraska, have done, are doing specifically in Omaha on this issue of promoting ADUs, trying to educate and also trying to advocate for them. This top picture is one of my favorite pictures I have. That's 3 of our awesome AARP Nebraska advocacy volunteers buttonholing former Senator Justin Wayne. In 2020, Senator Wayne introduced and got passed the Municipal Density and Missing Middle Housing Act. That bill required the 11 largest communities in our state to develop housing action plans. It specifically required them to call out what they were doing to promote missing middle housing and ADUs. Obviously, the city of Omaha was one of the 11 communities impacted by that legislation. And they, in 2022, had a very transparent, open, kudos to the city of Omaha for their process that led to the adoption of the Housing Affordability and Action Plan. Included in that plan were recommendations that AARP had endorsed, both on promoting more missing middle housing, making zoning reforms for more additional missing middle housing, duplexes, but also had recommendations to improve the process for people to be able to get permits and build accessory dwelling units. We are pleased to partner with the city. I'll talk more about some of the projects we did on the educational side of things that led to, about a year ago, Omaha City Council actually approved the ADU zoning code reforms, and perhaps Tim will get more into those. I will say before that, I think the city quite rightly said that they did allow ADUs, but just none were being built. I think the change, the fact that they are being permitted and built now, is largely due to the education efforts a whole bunch of people have taken to let people know about ADUs and their benefits, and then the streamlining that did occur with the zoning reform that was passed in 2024 by the Omaha City Council. So again, we were promoting ADUs, trying to work on the advocacy side, but just weren't seeing more results in the public side. So in 2023, we partnered with a whole bunch of awesome folks. You recognize probably most of those logos there, including Spark, to launch something that we called an ADU for You. It's an accessory dwelling unit Omaha design competition. When we went into the design competition, I really went in with 2 goals. And I'll say we worked with the R.L. Mace Universal Design Institute out of North Carolina to help us run this project. But my 2 goals was to increase education, increase awareness, to really do a sort of a PR blitz in the city of Omaha to help educate the public on what ADUs are, what their benefits are, how they could be envisioned in people's, single family dwellings or in their backyards. And then the other goal was to create real life, real world, buildable ADU designs that would be, of Omaha, that would fit the nature of it. We did require that the designers incorporate universal design features within their designs. And I will say I was nervous. I was really nervous from launch date to the deadline of the competition. I kept hoping if we get 2 designs, we can judge 2. You need at least 2. And I'll say the morning of our deadline, I got a call from the R.L. Mace folks who said, we only have 5. That's not very good. Should we extend the deadline? I said, I don't think it will help to extend the deadline, so let's just keep going. And by the end of the day, we had well over 20. So it proved there was a lot of interest in the city of Omaha. It also proved to me that builders and designers are probably procrastinators, waiting to the last minute to get their designs in. So we assembled a panel of expert judges on this. They looked at all the designs and they picked 3 winners and 1 honorable mention. And you see the winners here. The winning design came from Alley Pointer. Also want to point out the honorable mention from Macondo. They were doing some really interesting thing on garage conversions that really caught the eye of our judges. So, you know, I think that, as I said, we had those two goals to get buildable designs. We certainly reached that one, and to increase awareness. I think we did accomplish that. This was a headline and a story from the Omaha World Herald that talked about the competition and talked about the effort to change the zoning in the city of Omaha. Tim will talk more about the really proactive, progressive moves the city of Omaha has made with more information, a website, and other things. I'll leave that to him to talk about. I did want to mention there is one other project that we're working on for this year with a lot of the same partners I've talked about before. One of our folks had an idea of saying, wouldn't it be great to build one of these so people could see it? So that's what we're doing. We're working with a variety of partners. ARP has funded this effort, and we're going to build the alley pointer winning design, place it at the heartland of the Americas Park for a matter of months as sort of a pop-up education tool. I think people being able to see it, people being able to walk around it, get a feel for its space, both its capacity to be someplace where people could live, but also its space as far as it's fitting within their own backyard will be educational. So hopefully we'll have more of an announcement of timing of that soon, but it's an exciting new effort, hopefully one that will, again, continue that education effort that's been at the center part of our work. So 2 resources. I think I provided the ABCs of ADUs as a download for this presentation. If you don't have that, you can certainly go to aarp.org/ADU. The ABCs of ADUs is like a 20-page primer on best practices for how towns and cities can include ADUs in their mix of housing options. I will say it is probably the most popular publication that AARP has. The second one on the screen is the Accessory Dwelling Units Step-by-Step Guide and Design and Development. And again, is a sort of a design catalog of ADUs, very popular. Also encourage you to go to aarp.org/ADU for more information on sort of the resource that we have. I would say AARP does a very good job of providing resources to folks out there. I think we're going to hold audience questions. That is our contact information. With that, I will stop my share and let Tim go and join you at the end for questions. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Todd. And just so you all know, you will get a copy of this presentation as well as that ABCs of ADUs as well. And Tim, I will let you unmute yourself and share your screen.
All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, thanks for having me today. My name is Tim Freeze. I work for the City of Omaha Planning Department. I work in our Urban Design Division. I'm going to talk mostly about the zoning requirements for ADUs. I will touch briefly at the end to talk about some of the building code implications. I'm not an expert on that by any means. There's just a few things that have come up as we've sort of looked to get these permitted that I'll touch on. But I do have contact information for the folks in the Permits and Inspections Office who sort of are experts on the building code and can answer any questions you have about that side of things. So as Todd had mentioned, we adopted an updated ADU code a little over a year ago. There was language in the code previously that allowed them, but it was very restrictive. You had to have like everyone on your block or 3/4 of them agree to allow ADUs, and it was just there was lots of barriers to having them implemented. So there's a code that was passed. What I'm going to do is go over some details about what's interpreted as an ADU and what isn't, and then the specifics that are in that zoning code about where they're allowed, setbacks, things like that. And then again, touch on some of those building code issues and then go over the website that was developed for ADUs. So So Todd had mentioned an ADU is a second housing unit on a residential lot. That form can vary. We'll go over those in a little bit. But the fact is it's an additional living unit. So kitchen, bathroom, has all those things. Why are they important? Again, Todd went over a lot of those, but accommodate needs of changing households, address housing affordability, allow additional population density, and with that utilize existing city infrastructure. So there are 3 types that are defined in the zoning code. That is an internal ADU is one that's within the envelope of an existing residential structure, an existing house. So that's a conversion of an attic or a basement to an ADU. There's really little to no impact on the outside of adding one of those. The second one is an attached ADU. So that's something that's added on to the existing home. It has a separate foundation, but has its own sort of separate entry into it. But it's attached to that house. And the last one is a detached ADU, which is, again, sort of separate from the house, its own sort of structure. We have some different regulations regarding setbacks and things like that with detached ADUs, which I'll go over in a little bit. So what's not an ADU? So there are other types of uses that are defined in the zoning code that aren't considered ADUs. There's 2-family residential, which is 2 detached units on one lot. So that looks a lot like a detached ADU. And there's also a duplex, which is 2 units within one structure. So sort of like an internal or even an attached ADU could also be considered a duplex. The difficulty with these 2 housing types is that they're restricted to certain zoning districts. And so you have to have sort of a higher density designation in order to build them. And they're not allowed in those sort of lower density zoning districts. So again, ADU is going to look a lot like both of these things, but ADUs are sort of different, a different definition. Another thing that's not an ADU is renting a bedroom in a house and sharing a kitchen. So you could have a 3-bedroom house and there's 3 college kids that live in it together and they share a kitchen. That's not an ADU. That's not considered an ADU. The code does only allow 3 unrelated people to live in a dwelling unit. So you can't have a 4-bedroom house and have 4 unrelated people. And related means anybody related family. So wife, your wife's family, anybody, it'd be 3 completely unrelated people. And the other thing, and this is something that sort of came up later as we were permitting some ADUs or people were coming in, is based on the building code and things like that, if there's a living area with a kitchen that has a connection to the rest of the house. So if you put a kitchen in your basement and you say, one of your aging parents is going to live there, but there's a stairs up to the upper floor and there's a door that connects it, that's not considered an ADU because you could put a kitchen in your basement otherwise and not necessarily rent it out or anything like that. So we made a distinction that in order for something to be considered an ADU, it has to be completely separated from the rest of the house. So that is one thing that we didn't really think about when we were going through the code about how to interpret it. But then when things came in for building permits later, we had some discussion and between us and the permits and inspections, we sort of decided that as long as that there was that connection, that it wouldn't be considered an ADU. So going over the ordinance, so where are these allowed? So there's a couple different processes you would need to get approved. The first one is where they're permitted by right. And so that's basically where the zoning code says you can just come in and get a building permit and build one of these without any special approval. Those are in our higher intensity residential districts, so R5 through R8. And then other districts that allow residential and commercial sort of together. These are the acronyms for them. Neighborhood Business District, Central Business District are sort of those things. And these are detailed in the code, which I have a link to. The second way is where you would need a conditional use permit. And that is a separate approval process that just goes to planning board. And I'll talk about that process a little more later. But but those are required in sort of lower intensity residential districts, so DR, R1 through R4, and other districts that allow residential with a use permit. So there's some office and commercial that say you can't have residential, but you also have to get a use permit. So ADUs are allowed in those with a use permit. If you need to find your zoning, I have a link here to this handy tool. You can just, it's a website, and basically all you have to do is type in your address. I will just type in our office for work, and it should populate things. You can click on it, and then it'll take you right to it to find your zoning. Fairly easy. This is our office downtown. You could ignore if something comes up. Really, you're looking at only those first 2 or 3 letters. These other ones are overlays, and that doesn't really impact ADUs at all. So that's a tool. The link is in there if you want to use it. You can also just click around on here and find zoning for various locations. So that's sort of where they're allowed or where they're permitted by right, and where you might have to go through an extra approval process to allow an ADU. So specific things that are in the ordinance. This is a link to the code section. It's pretty minimal as far as code sections go. I'm going to go over all of this stuff, but this is where you would find those regulations for future reference. So one of the regulations is you can have no more than 1 ADU per site, and that sort of prevents somebody from just building multiple units on a site. So you're allowed to have one. Once you have one, that's it. Whether it's internal or external or attached or detached, you can only have one. So the largest building on the site is considered the primary dwelling unit. So this is important because, as I mentioned later, we don't really regulate the size that an ADU can be. But if you were to say, let's say, want to build another dwelling unit, and let's say I'm going to call it an ADU, but it's larger than the house that's on there. Well, that new building you're building is now considered the primary dwelling unit, and the previous building would be considered the accessory dwelling unit because it's smaller. This comes into play. It essentially what it does is prevent people from building larger ADUs behind sort of smaller structures, because we have regulations about the accessory dwelling unit has to be behind the primary dwelling unit. So the largest building on site is considered the primary dwelling unit. In lower intensity districts, so that's those DR, R1 through R4, only 3 unrelated persons may occupy the entire site. So both the primary dwelling unit and the accessory dwelling unit. So in this case, if you had a house with 2 bedrooms, you had a roommate, you could build an ADU and have someone else rent the ADU. But you couldn't, have 3 unrelated people living in a house and then build an ADU to have a 4th person. Any ADU that is rented must be registered with the city. So the city went through a process a number of years ago to have a rental registry that you have to register. There's potential for periodic inspections with those, but it's just to ensure that those rental units are safe and meet current codes. And the ADU cannot be sold separately from the primary dwelling unit. So you can't, make it a condo and try to sell it to someone. You can't try to parcel off that piece of land with the ADU and sell it separately. It has to be on the same lot with the primary dwelling unit, sold as sort of a pair. Then there are some site development regulations. So these are items that regulate sort of setbacks, how much building you can have on a site, things like that. So every zoning district has a set of site development regulations, all of those things. And the ADU code modifies some of those in order to make the construction of them a little more feasible. The first one has to do with site coverage. So each zoning district has a percentage of the lot that can be covered by both a building and then impervious coverage. So the building coverage, that's sort of obvious. It's the roof here in this graphic with this building. Impervious coverage includes the roof, but also includes any driveways, patios, paths, anything where water hits it and it will drain off. Generally, the building coverages, it depends on the zoning district. But generally the impervious coverages are about 10% more than the building coverages. So if building coverage was 40%, the impervious coverage is usually around 50%. What the ADU code does was allows you to increase both of those by 15% for improvements related to the ADU. So if you had a 40% building coverage, you could go up to 55 to construct the ADU. Same with impervious coverage, you could go from 50 to 65. The key here is that it's related to the ADU, so you can't build an ADU and then say, oh, I'm going to build a giant patio on the back to increase it for the primary dwelling unit. If there's driveways or there's patios associated with the ADU, those can be accounted for that 15%, but you can't like widen the driveway for the main house and go over those impervious coverages. One thing just to note here, decks are considered pervious because generally the area underneath them is soil or something. So if water hits it, it will go through the boards and drain through the soil. So those are not considered impervious. They're considered pervious. One other thing, entrances. So we have regulations in there that exterior stairs that face streets can't be more than 6 treads high. The reasoning for this largely has to do with, if you think about someone wanted to put an internal ADU in the house. They wanted to convert the attic space into an ADU. If they want to have a separate entrance, what we wanted to do was prevent someone putting on, a set of stairs that's 2 stories tall, that's just a wooden set of stairs in the front of the house. The goal is to kind of keep these things, keep the neighborhood, sort of having the same appearance and the same development pattern, and not sort of have things added on that would sort of detract from that. So if you wanted to do that case, you could put the stairs on the side of the house and the back of the house, but you just can't sort of put that on the front of the house and have a large staircase. Also, the entrance must face a street, alley, or interior of the site. The goal here is to prevent an ADU with a door that faces the neighbor's backyard. So someone's coming and going and they're just sort of, that sort of activity happens facing a neighboring property. So setback regulations. So generally with with an internal ADU, obviously it's inside the building, so you don't really have to worry about it. With an attached ADU, if it's attached to the building, then you have to follow whatever the setback regulations are for that zoning district. If you have a detached ADU, there are modifications to those setbacks to be a little bit more flexible with where those are placed. So with detached ADU, the first one is that it has to be 20 feet behind the front facade of the primary dwelling unit. This is where I mentioned earlier about this code wouldn't allow you to build a bigger ADU in back, because that ADU would become the primary dwelling unit and it wouldn't meet this 20 foot behind the primary dwelling unit. So essentially anything that's built has to be smaller than the primary dwelling unit. It has to be 20 feet behind that front facade. So it could be off to the side a little bit. The goal here is to sort of keep them out of the front yard. There's a 5-foot setback from any interior sides. So in this, that's sort of B, interior sides, and there's an 8-foot setback from the rear, which is that letter C. The reason for these numbers, they actually come from the fact that a lot of the utility companies have a sort of blanket easement on many lots that match these numbers. So 5 foot on the side and 8 foot on the rear. So we wanted to make sure that any dwelling units that were built outside of those easements that exist on many of the lots in the city. If you can come up with evidence for the fact that there aren't any easements that exist on the property for utilities, then you could place them as close to 3 feet from the side and the rear. But that's something you would have to provide before we would issue a building permit or as part of that conditional use permit process. Height. So just to go back here, so if you're using the reduced setbacks for a detached ADU, so in that case, if you're if you're not meeting the standard setbacks for the zoning district and you're going, 5 feet from the side or 8 feet from the rear, your height is limited to 16 feet. We had lots of discussion about this. Initially, it's to sort of, if you're building close to that property line adjacent to neighbors, to keep the height sort of at 1 story or just above 1 story. If you're meeting the setbacks for the base zoning district, with a detached ADU or whatever, then the height limit is whatever the base zoning district is, which typically for a residential zoning district, a single family residential zoning district is like 35 feet. And then the other regulation is driveways, and that there's 1 driveway per street frontage. So if you don't have a corner lot, you only have 1 street frontage, and you have an existing driveway, and you want to have connection to the ADU, you have to figure out how to sort of connect that existing driveway to the ADU. If you have a corner lot, like if this were a corner lot, if this house wasn't over here, you could potentially have another driveway that came off to that side street, because you would still be meeting that one per street frontage. And the aim here is just to sort of keep development typical to what it is to those neighborhoods and not have a bunch of driveway curb cuts interrupting the pedestrian sort of circulation in the sidewalk. So here are things, so that was sort of an overview of what's regulated. Here are things that we don't regulate. So there's no specific size limit for the ADU, like either a hard number or some ordinances have a relation to the size of the primary dwelling unit. They allow it to be like 50%. We had some discussion and we just decided that we wouldn't regulate that. Again, as I mentioned, that sort of definition of the primary dwelling unit as the largest building would sort of prevent detached ADUs from being larger than that. But other than that, we don't have any sort of limit on size. Some other regulations do have a minimum distance between the accessory dwelling unit and the primary dwelling unit for detached ADUs. That's not something we do. There is items in the building code that would suggest that you have to be a certain distance, or if you're closer, that you have to provide additional construction sort of techniques in order to allow it to be closer. So that's something as you go through the building permit process, that might come into play. But as far as zoning goes, we don't have a minimum distance between the two. We're not regulating parking, so there's no additional parking required for the ADU. If you want to provide it, you can, but it's not something that you're required to do. Density, so any ADU that's added is exempt from any of the site area per unit or density requirements that are in the zoning code. And we're not regulating any style, design, materials, anything like that. I think our hope is that if they're sort of behind the building, they're sort of discreet. If they're attached to the building, most people are going to want that to be something that's going to look good with their house. We sort of didn't want to regulate that. There is a potential if you're in a historic district, one of our local landmark districts, that you have to go through a separate process to get approval of a design anyway. But in those other districts, we decided not to regulate those things. So the approval process, what does that look like? So again, those areas, those higher intensity residential zoning districts, they're allowed by right. So all you really need to do is come in and get a building permit, which is reviewed and then issued. Those lower intensity residential districts requires a conditional use permit. And what that looks like, and I got some examples after this for what those submittals sort of look like. But it's required for those low intensity zoning districts. It's planning board approval, so it's just one meeting with planning board. That board meets the first Wednesday of every month. Applications are submitted to planning about a month in advance from that meeting. If you just Google Omaha Planning Board, there's a schedule that you can see of when they meet and tells you the deadline days that you would need to have that information in. You have to have a site plan and building elevations. They have to be to scale, show property lines, location of existing structures, new structures, pavement. And if you have calculations of that building and impervious coverage, that is helpful. Just so you know that as part of that conditional use permit, properties within 300 feet and the neighborhood association, if there is one, receives notice of that request. So we sort of encourage people, if you go through that process, to meet with the neighbors, talk to the neighborhood association, let them know what you're doing. I don't, do you need to have a neighborhood meeting? Probably not. Some of our larger developments, we sort of request that, but it's helpful because what can happen is if you don't talk to the neighbors about it, and the first notice they get is from the planning department, they often will, they'll often come to the meeting because they don't really know what it's about. And that can sometimes delay the approval. In these cases, it's usually a small thing, but it's important, we think, to sort of meet with those people, talk with them ahead of time. That way you sort of head off any issues. They have the right to come and still protest if they don't, if it's your backdoor neighbor and you're meeting all the regulations and they still don't like it, they can come and talk to it. But as a general rule, the planning department supports those requests, and the planning board, it's up to the planning board to decide. And usually if you're following the regulations, that's not an issue of getting it approved. There's an application fee of $324. You do have to provide amendments for significant changes. So because that plan is approved and you have to sort of build what's shown in that plan. So if you come in and you show something and it gets approved by planning board, and later you're like, oh wait, I want to move it over here, the other side of the yard or something, you would have to do an amendment to that building permit or to the conditional use permit. It depends on what that amendment is. If you're just moving it a few feet, that amendment process is likely administrative and it just goes through something that we approve. If it's significant, if you're moving the setback greater or something like that, you might have to go through that process again. So it's good to sort of have this nailed down of where you want it to look like, and then you don't have to worry about doing any amendments. And then once all that is done, you can apply for the building permit. These are some examples we had from last year that were submitted for conditional use permits. I just provide them in here as examples of sort of, what's expected. They have the existing house, property lines, sort of setbacks of the ADU back here, from the property line. They're not showing any driveways or anything as associated with it. And then that one provided just sort of some very simple building elevations of what it's going to look like. So pretty low, it's not a lot of information you have to provide. This second one is actually a good example of sort of what this process looks like, because they came in, they have this site plan shown. Well, if you'll notice, the rear setback over here is 6 feet. It's kind of hard to read, but it's 6 feet. As I mentioned before, the code is 8 feet. So as part of the planning department writes a report for the planning board. And as part of that report, we still recommended approval, but we said that they had to shift it 2 feet basically to the left in order to meet that 8-foot setback requirement. So even if there's something that's a little off in your plan, it's not something that would necessarily mean that the department's going to say, revise the plans, come back next month. We have the ability to sort of suggest some things in the report that it can get approved, subject to you making those changes. They provided a little more information. They had a floor plan, a roof plan for what it's going to look like. This is probably more what's required for the building permit. This sort of wall section, that's something that's required for the building permit, but not necessarily for the conditional use permit. So briefly, I'm gonna, before I talk a little bit about our website, which has a lot of information, these are a couple things that have come up with regards to permitting these and how the ADUs can relate to the building code. Again, I'm not the expert on this. I've included 2 contacts with the planning department. We have 2 separate people, one person who reviews building permits for remodels, additions, things like that. That's Jesus. He can answer any questions for that. So that'd be like an attached or an internal ADU, those kind of things. And then we have another person who reviews building permits for new construction. So that would be more like a detached ADU, and that's Mike Grothy. So that's their contact information. I encourage you, if you have specific things, to reach out to them. But one of the things that we've run into is this has to do with more with converting existing garages into ADUs, and that's frost footing. So frost footings, if you don't know, are basically concrete piers that go down below the frost line. So we're below where the ground freezes in the winter. And those things sit on ground that does not move at all. It's not subject to frost heaving, which is, expanding and contracting of water in the soil that can move things around. So if it's below that frost line, if it's not freezing, then it won't move at all. And then, your house is connected to that. The issue is that garages don't necessarily have to have a frost footing. They can be built on a slab of concrete. They could have, some foundation, but not go all the way below the frost line. And so if you have an existing garage that you want to convert to an ADU, it's important that you look into whether or not it has a frost footing or not, because the minute you convert it to a living unit, it has to have a frost footing. And that's because not only do you not want it moving around, but you also are now connecting utilities to it. You've got, water, you've got sewer, all that stuff. And the last thing you want is a building or those things moving around separate from the building itself. So that is one thing that has come up with. So if we've had some cases where the garages are built with it, and they've done some investigation and they've provided evidence that yes, it has a frost footing, you're fine. And other times it hasn't. So that's one of the big things and that again has to do with more converting an existing structure, because anything that's new that's going to be built, if you look back at this sort of building section here, it's got that frost footing sort of built into it. So that's one big thing with existing buildings. The other thing has to do with the fire code. So just so you're, sort of aware of these things, again, I'm not the expert, but with internal and attached ADU, they have to have separate HVAC systems. So that's because if there's a fire in one of them, if you have connected HVAC systems, that fire can travel through the HVAC system to the other unit. You might also have to have fire separation between the units. There is, I think, an update to the residential building code that rather than providing like fire separation, something that's physical in the wall, if you have interconnected smoke detectors, that's sufficient, just so that if there's a fire in one of the units and something's happening, the other unit's aware that it's happening and it can get out. That's the whole point of fire separation. Physical fire separation is to give someone time in an adjacent unit to get out if there's a fire in another unit and they're not aware of it. So the interconnected smoke detectors could serve that purpose. Again, if you have questions about the specifics, you should contact one of these folks in the building code. And then with detached ADUs, if you're closer than 5 feet to the property line, it triggers fire code regulations, which has to do with you have to have fire separation. And depending on how close you are, you can limit it opening, so windows and doors and things like that. So just so you're aware, and you might also have to have fire separation if you're close to that primary dwelling unit. So those are a couple things just so that you're sort of aware of those if you decide to move forward with one. Again, sort of a current planning, urban design can help you with some of those zoning regulations, but the folks in permits and inspections are the ones to talk to about specific building code questions. And lastly, so we do have an ADU website which contains a lot of this information, has a how-to guide, the plans that Todd had mentioned. So we have some of those that were part of that competition, but we also have one pre-approved plan that's free to use. You do have to, so these are sort of building plans, so they provide floor plans and exterior materials, but you have to provide a site plan showing where they're located. It's got the zoning code and some frequently asked questions. I'll just bring it up real quick here so you can sort of take a look at it. So this front page, again, has sort of those definitions we went over. has links to certain things. Down here at the bottom of the front page is those frequently asked questions. A lot of those we sort of went over today, but for future reference. The how-to guide sort of gives you a flow chart. So depending on, you can use that zoning lookup tool, figure out where you're at, go through that. That process gives you a little bit more information on the permitting process. Here's the plans that we have. So the first one, these are pre-approved plans. So essentially you can use these free of charge. They're something that the city developed. Obviously, if you make changes to them, if you want to make it bigger, then obviously that's going to be something that's different. But this is something that's pre-approved. These plans could come in. Again, you would just have to provide the site plan saying, showing the footprint and where it's going on that existing lot, where the property lines are, the existing building. And then these are some of the custom plans that were from the competition. So they have information in here, but you have to purchase these separately from the designer, since they went through the effort of, spending their time and effort putting this together. You would need to reach out to them if you wanted to use one of these. But again, they're sort of ready to go, and prevents you from having to, somebody actually designing it. So the plans are there. And then there is a link to the code here as well. I think I have a link in a presentation as well to this section, again, about accessory dwelling units. So I think that is it for me. I know it was a lot, so if you guys have any questions, feel free.
Wonderful. We had a lot of great information from both Todd and Tim. So at this time, we're going to open it up for questions. You can either drop your question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, hi everyone. I'm Pasca. This presentation was wonderful. Thank you guys so much. My question was, I had two questions. Maybe this is to Spark and then to them. With the plans that are already pre-approved, so they already went through the approval process, we're just taking them and then giving them to the contractors, correct? And then how do I register to be a part of the Spark Developer Academy as a Nebraska resident? Is there a certain process to go through?
Yes, well, I can answer that question for you. It is an application-based program. So on our website, Pasca, it kind of walks you through the steps. We will have our applications opening up for our Fall Developer Academy sometime in September. But if you scroll up, check that link that I sent in the chat box, and it will give you the information. And you can also email me and follow up as well.
Thank you. I will do that.
With regards to the plans, so they're pre-approved in the sense that they've been vetted by our permits and inspections. You still need to get a building permit. So you would take those plans, and then you need a site plan showing where it's going. And then, yeah, you would talk to a contractor. Generally, the contractor is the one that pulls the building permit. Usually that's part of their process. I think that there is I think in the frequently asked questions, there is the ability for a homeowner to build their own ADU if they feel like it's something that they can take on, if they're familiar with construction techniques. I would talk more to permits and inspections about what that looks like if you want to build your own, because generally when you submit a building permit, you have to have a contractor that's associated with it, and they have to be a certain grade of contractor depending on the project. So the short answer is talk to the contractor, they'll get the permit, and then you're good to go. If you want to build it yourself, that's something I would talk to a P&I about what you need to do that.
Thank you. That answers all my questions. I'll be in touch.
Thank you. And I know I had a couple questions. Yes, everyone will get a copy of the recording, and you will also get both PowerPoint presentations and the ABCs of ADUs as well. Our next question, is a detached ADU allowed on the same lot as an existing duplex?
Yes. provided that the duplex has the correct zoning to be a duplex. And so that's, it's anything like R5 and above, similar to where you are allowed ADUs by right. So if you're duplex, and probably, I don't know, usually if you rent one side of that, you probably would have to be part of the rental registry. But yes, a duplex is a separate use, so it's not considered an ADU. So you could have an ADU on that same lot, provided it meets all the other zoning requirements.
Very good. Next question. Is there any financing available for homeowners to build ADUs?
I'll start with this. I think that I think the short answer is it's difficult. And part of this is, as I look at ADUs and where we've gotten to now, I think this is the next thing those of us who are advocating for them need to step up to and begin to find better ways to finance these things. And part of that is educating lenders about the benefits of these ADUs. Right now, that's, I think, a difficult task for us to have. And so I know that people do run into some issues with getting financing. In my presentation, and I mentioned it at the end, there were two resources, the ABCs and ADUs. The other one, the Accessory Dwelling Units, a step-by-step guide, does have a discussion of financing and budgeting for ADUs. So there is a little bit into that. And again, I would go to aarp.org/ADUs for more information on financing. But folks have a great idea for how we can do a better job of educating lenders about the need to have products that will help finance ADUs. I'm all ears, because I think it's something we need to really focus on.
Very good. Next question. If a basement has stairs to the home, could that entry be closed off to be considered as an ADU?
Yeah, you could. Yes, you could. If you wanted to, you could. If as part of the building permit, you would show filling in the door with drywall or whatever, and then it would have to be. Then it could be considered a separate ADU. You still have to provide, all the fire exits, all of that other stuff. They have to have a separate exit. But if you wanted to, yes, you could.
All right, our next question is actually for Spark, and Brian or Angela, if either of you are available, you might be able to answer this better than I can. But does Spark provide financing for ADUs? If so, do you have to sell the ADU or can you keep it as a rental?
I'm happy to jump in here. Angela with Spark Capital team. We have not funded the development of an ADU as of yet. I don't know that our board would say no to it. The only financing mechanism we'd have right now, though, is our traditional Spark Capital Loan Fund. And we would have to, that could be rental or for sale. I don't think we would be able to use this with our middle income workforce housing product.
Thank you, Angela. And that looks like that was our last question in the chat box. Does anyone have any other questions before we close? Okay, well, Todd, Tim, thank you both so much for joining us. So much great information. Everyone, like I said, you'll get those follow-up materials. They will come from an email from Eventbrite. Make sure you stay tuned for our deep dive next month, and make sure you stay tuned for our development symposium tickets that will be on sale soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. See you all soon.